is program 3 in the Always Articulate Attorney, Interpersonal Communication Skills. And I call this program Gesture the Structure. At the end of this program, you are going to understand how gesture helps you speak more fluently. You'll begin to use your gestures consciously to get the feel for it. And you'll understand how important it is to focus your eyes on the people that you're talking to. So let's look at the strange, mysterious role that the body plays in interpersonal communication. How the body has a role in the flow of thoughts and the flow of words. A sometimes subliminal role, often unnoticed subconscious role, but a role nonetheless. And let's talk about those moments especially when you are trying to communicate interpersonally and there is tension involved. You're talking with a client who is unhappy and you feel that tension. It might be in person, it might be on the phone. Or you're in a negotiation where there is tension in the room and you feel that adrenaline as the result of that. Or you're sitting at a conference table and there are lots of people and there's a certain tension in the room and you need to communicate, but you're feeling that adrenaline buzz. What does adrenaline do to us as speakers? And how is it that you can channel that adrenaline and make it work for you and not against you? Well, adrenaline is a very mysterious part of human behavior. It's a very primitive part of our response. And that response often has to do with energizing the body and slowing down in the brain our perception of time. So when that adrenaline rush is in place, it's particularly important to allow your gestures to do what they naturally do. So my challenge to you as I speak to you is, how do you gesture with your hands in casual conversation when you are completely comfortable? And do you know the answer to that question? Most people don't. When we have an adrenaline rush, adrenaline literally is sending energy, more energy, into the arms as part of the fight or flight response. And the fight response, of course, is an arm response. People who are uncomfortable tend to fidget with their hands. You know, think about the classic cliche of being nervous. He was so nervous he was wringing his hands. Or maybe he's playing with his pen, or he's shuffling his paper. What is that behavior that is a giveaway that you're not comfortable? Well, it's the energy of gesturing that gets misdirected into nervous behavior that is a giveaway, is a tell that you are in fact less comfortable. So understanding the body's role in communicating begins by understanding what do you do with your hands, and raising your awareness to how do you gesture when you're comfortable, because that's the way you want to gesture when you are uncomfortable, as a way to create that sense of being more at ease, sometimes the illusion of being more at ease even when you're not. So you need to raise your awareness to how you gesture in conversation. And here's why it's so important. The energy that adrenaline gives you can either be blocked and locked away, that's what all that nervous behavior is, or it can be liberated and freed up. And here's why this is so important. There's some very interesting research about how much the flow of your natural gestures not only is natural, because everyone does it more or less, so you need to know the answer of where you are on that continuum, but natural gestures literally help us as speakers find and fetch the words we need to say. In other words, fluency. Fluency with words is accompanied by a certain fluency and flow of your natural gestures. So it's natural and it helps you talk. And the third component of this is it actually helps listeners understand and comprehend what it is that you're talking about. And that's maybe the greatest mystery, because we are not conscious of gestures as the speaker using the gestures, nor as the listener having those gestures assist our understanding. But the research fundamentally says that gestures sometimes provide the most interesting and valuable piece of information as people talk, because gestures, when you think about it, often are a kind of visual aid. They actually say, well, let me show you what I'm talking about. I've got this dilemma that I'd like to go to the party, but I'm too busy. And my hands are literally saying, let me show you what I'm talking about. And we often, as respondents listening to that, say, oh, I see what you're talking about. You've got a dilemma. I see the dilemma. I see what you mean, because you're showing to me that dilemma with your hands. I'd like to go, but gosh, I'm so busy. So what do gestures actually do? What is a way of encapsulating this mysterious behavior of your natural gestures in conversation, sometimes activated by adrenaline and the need to liberate them in conversation? Well, Shakespeare, the ultimate expert perhaps in how language works and how language was delivered, summed it up with a perfect description of natural gestures. Shakespeare said this, that natural gestures, in his words, are suit the action to the word and the word to the action. And that is exactly what we do with our hands. We are naturally, without even knowing it, without ever even thinking about it, suiting what we're saying to the action of the gestures, and the action of the gestures is completely suited to the words. That's why gestures remain so often invisible. We don't see them, because the gestures are so completely connected to and fit with what we're saying that the gestures themselves disappear into the meaning of what we're saying. And the research about gesturing that's done at all sorts of important gesture labs at places like the University of Chicago, where there's the McNeil Gesture Labs, or the University of Pennsylvania, what they have studied proves that gestures like subliminal advertising provide information to your listener that allows them to understand what you're talking about. Now, you may have had people tell you, well, don't gesture, gesture is distracting. Or if you're someone who knows that you gesture a lot, you may have been teased with someone saying, hey, if we tied your hands behind your back, you couldn't talk. And there is some interesting truth to that. At the University of Chicago, they did this study. They said, well, let's see how much gestures help people remember. In fact, if we lock away people's hands, will we lock up their brains? So they did this study. They taught some information to a group, and then they tested them aloud on what they'd learned. And they said to half the group, when you answer these questions, gesture freely, no limitations. They said to the other half of the group, do not move your hands. As you answer these questions, leave your hands locked away. The equivalent of someone who doesn't gesture in conversation or plays with their pen or holds onto their legal pad. The people who did not gesture were able to remember 20% less of what they just learned than the people who were gesturing. So there is some literal truth to the fact that if we tie your hands up, we tie your brains up. If we lock up the gestures, we lock up the thought process. So it is so important to understand that you don't need to monitor your gestures. I'm certainly not suggesting that you're going to think constantly about what should my hands be doing as I talk, but to know that you have deeply embedded within you this instinct to gesture. And you need to liberate it. You need to just trust that it already exists and you can use it. You can almost think of it as, in conversation, you are already the world's expert at how you gesture, but you may not know it. In fact, you may not know it to this degree. I often have people say to me after I've lectured, you said that everyone gestures, but I never gesture. And as they say that, I never gesture, they what? They gesture. That's how instinctive and unconscious it is. So, I'm suggesting you need to raise your awareness to it. And you need to liberate it when the pressure's on, because if you don't, that extra energy of adrenaline when you're speaking in a situation where there's tension will lead you to behaviors that not only lock up your brain, but make you look nervous. So let me share with you some obvious patterns that we use with gesturing. I've already done the one hand, other hand gesture. And think how common that is. It's so common that we often say it without necessarily doing it. On the one hand, here are the pros, and on the other hand, here are the cons. Here's the good, here's the bad. And we often use that expression, well, on the one hand and on the other hand, so that it's such a common gestural pattern that we actually have turned it into a verbal pattern as well. So think about how just in that way, you're listening to someone and you think, I'm about to respond to what they're saying, and I want to respond with, well, here's my positive response to what you're saying, but at the same time, here's my negative response. Here are the pros and here are the cons. Well, that's a common gestural, what I will call template. Think about how often, as a lawyer, you need to explain to someone a sequence of how the deal will go down, or a sequence of events that led to this problem that we are now facing. Well, gestures often engage in that kind of sequential movement across the shelf. That we got together and we had the negotiation and we even signed the contract, and then you didn't get paid. So there's our problem, and the gestures flow across in that particular way. So our gestures play a role in saying, let me be the visual aid of showing you the one hand, other hand dilemma. Let me show you this flow of events as it goes across the shelf. It's the kind of gesturing, believe me, you already do. Even those who might be skeptical listening to me and thinking, I don't gesture. Oh, but I'm gesturing. That's the thing you now want to liberate. And again, not to make it phony, not to make it theatrical, not to do something that is not authentic to you, but you need to know what that authenticity actually entails, because gestures have a very important role to play. So one other thing about the body that's so important in communication, it has to do with eye contact. On some simple level, you cannot focus your brain if you do not focus your eyes. So you need to do it for yourself as a way to say, I'm going to need to get my eyes focused on this person that I'm talking to if I want to focus my brain in the midst of doing that kind of communicating. And at the same time, think about how important eye contact is when it comes to credibility. How often we say, can you look me in the eye and tell me that? And you sometimes need to look people in the eye and tell them things that are not easy to tell them the problem, to report to them in a way that says, I'm going to confidently look you in the eye and tell you this, and that is not always easy. So here's my suggestion. Raise your awareness to how much do you make eye contact? Do you know? I will admit that all of us have, myself included, places that our eyes go when we think. I know from long experience watching myself on video as a speaker and a communicator that I'm an upthinker. That when I'm looking for the next word or the next thought, I go up. Is that what you do? Pay attention to that. Some people go down. They go to the floor to say, I'm looking for that next word. Some people even often go off to the side as part of that thought process. Well, I'm not saying that you're going to make unbroken eye contact 100% of the time with another person. That would be strange in a different kind of way. So I'm saying you've got permission to go off and think, down, up, or to the side. But it's so important to get that sense that I'm looking you in the eye, because it portrays a certain kind of credibility and a certain kind of confidence. And if you don't look people in the eye, something very important is missing. So the body has a role to play in this act of communicating. Not a role to play in the sense that you need to learn how to do a lot of things differently, but rather you need to learn what you already do that works. And once you've become aware of it, you might realize, gosh, I actually don't look people in the eye very much. Or I tend to really just lock up when I'm uncomfortable and my gestures completely go away, and I need to be looser than that. So this is more about awareness than learning a skill. This is about understanding an instinct and dragging that instinct up to a conscious comfort so you can trust that. And then we've got the whole thing put together. We've got a brain that understands how the brain works in chunks. We've got a voice that speaks in phrases, emphasize key words, and walks down the steps. And we've got a body that contributes to that act of communicating, where we're finding that flow of natural gestures that assists that flow of thoughts and words. So let's review what we've learned about the body's role in speaking in an articulate fashion. Talk to yourself and say this: liberate your gestures. It will help you talk. Say that. Then talk to yourself and say this: show your listeners what you're talking about with your gestures. Say that. And finally, focus your eyes to focus your brain. Say that. Give your body a role to play, because it has a very important connection to how you think and how you speak.